Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Full Oversteer podcast. I'm Tyler Owenson, joined here by my colleague Shay Rogers, and we are here to preview the final three races of the 2024 Formula One season. It's looking very good for Max Verstappen after his sensational victory in Sao Paulo. All he has to do is beat Norris and keep a 60-point lead, leaving Nevada, and he's won the championship. So heading into that race in Las Vegas, which is the second race held there since his return from the dreadful Caesars Palace race back in the 1980s. Yeah, it's pretty much a full-blown formality now for Verstappen. He's going to win the fourth title, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at it, and there's absolutely no chance that Lando Norris, based off form alone, can turn this around all season. There's been that hope among fans, among those in the media that have kind of been strung along by Norris the whole way, going, right, this is where he starts to pick up consistent race victories. And he had that chance in Sao Paulo, just didn't take it again. So at this point, it very much feels like attention pretty much completely turns to 2025 after Las Vegas. Because with another bad weekend like in Brazil, I believe if they finish in the same positions they did in Brazil, it would be race over effectively.
Yeah, it does seem that way as well. Just another missed opportunity as well for Norris, as several times as we've seen throughout the season, really, especially during the period. I mean, it's been 10 Grand Prix since Verstappen last won a race from Sao Paulo up until his previous win in Barcelona, and from there, I mean, Norris he's put in some good performances. I mean, the McLaren has clearly been quicker than the Red Bull in quite a lot of the races during that time. Just hasn't been able to maximise that performance. I mean, Sao Paulo was the prime example. Yeah, it was torrential weather conditions, but Verstappen was just unbelievable, and Norris took pole position, lost it off the start again to Russell, and then I guess in a way got unlucky with the whole Colapinto crash and the red flag and the two Alpines, and Max boxed and he didn't, and well, no, sorry, he boxed early. It was the other way around, wasn't it? And Max and the Alpines stayed out, and yeah, red flag comes out, and I guess in that way is a bit unlucky. But then the mistakes at the end, towards the end of it as well, just put him pretty much on the back foot now. But for me, it was always going to be an impossible uphill struggle for Norris to even win the championship past Verstappen at this point, and I think that victory in Sao Paulo has all but sealed it now for Verstappen. But I think for me, it'd be fair to say anyway. I don't know whether you agree, but I think McLaren, with the performance that they've had, and they're fighting Ferrari and Red Bull for the constructors' championship, that next year they're just going to come back even stronger, like they did at the start of this year.
Yeah, I think we saw a kind of similar thing in 2021 with the Red Bull were just turning the tide. Um, Obviously, last year McLaren weren't title contenders, and in 2020 Red Bull weren't title contenders. But when the championship got close, the next year they then exploded and started dominating. I'm not saying we're going to see domination from McLaren, but that could be the case. Looking ahead to Las Vegas, it's a very important race for them because with three to go, Ferrari with a good weekend can really apply some pressure. And there, I believe, is already some pressure on Lando Norris in Vegas with the fact that he crashed out last year here. So I doubt his confidence is massively high. He didn't win last time out in Brazil. He's going to be on a bit of a down, a bit of a missed opportunity. Let's say that was. So at the end of the day, he's got to find something here, and he's also going to need teammate Oscar Piastri to turn up, who showed signs of being slightly better again in Sao Paulo after being a bit off form. I think, out of anyone on the grid, it's the biggest weekend for McLaren because they are no doubt now very eager to end that 16-year title drought, which has lingered over them for a very long while, even 3 years of having cars that were capable of winning the championship 2010, 2012. So, yeah, Lando Norris needs a big weekend, and whether or not that changes how he approaches Max Verstappen is another question.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we don't want another repeat of, well, we've seen it several times over the season where they have come together, and you probably would think that you kind of have to think it's probably this weekend might be a sign of desperation for Norris. I mean, he will be wanting to go for it because this is effectively his last chance. Verstappen can confirm his fourth title in a row at this weekend, so there is the need for a good weekend. And obviously, as you say there, his retirement last year will perhaps want to spur him on a little bit more, but he will face that competition. I mean, obviously. I think many fans in and around the paddock and worldwide would be wanting McLaren to win the Constructors' Championship with their history, and it's been so long since they've taken the top step. But they face competition not only from Verstappen but also from Ferrari, which you touched upon as well. I remember them going quite strong at Vegas last year, particularly Charles Leclerc. I think it was did he snatch second off Perez? I think in the final lap around the final corner. So the Ferraris are no pushover either around this circuit, and they've proved that over the last couple of races as well with their improved performance. Would you say that they've got a fighting chance potentially to not only battle McLaren but even Verstappen at the front?
Yeah, I think there is a possibility of that. They're a weird entity this year, Ferrari.
Yeah,
I
they
feel
are.
like every single time where I begin to go, right, they just haven't got it compared to McLaren and Red Bull, they'll spring up and win a race, or two or three in a row. Um, and in Brazil, again, they just look nowhere. Sainz and Leclerc didn't challenge towards the front at all, especially in the race. They were nowhere. But again, they're going to a track that they were decent at last year. Obviously, Science got taken out by a manhole cover last year. We're hoping that that doesn't happen this time around. Um, but if they can have a less turbulent Thursday evening, I believe it is, because it's Thursday, Friday,
Right.
Saturday on the schedule in Las Vegas. If they can have a less turbulent Thursday evening, then they might be in with a chance of stealing another race victory. And if they steal another race victory, they are very much within clutching distance of challenging McLaren heading into both Qatar and in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, certainly. And the thing is, it's also been a long time since Ferrari last won a constructors title as well. 2008, I think, was the last time they won one. So they're obviously desperately looking to break that duck as well. Moving on to obviously the final two races in the Middle East in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. I mean, obviously, if Verstappen confirms the title in Las Vegas, those two races are pretty much, well, they're, well, not meaningless because obviously the constructors are still to fight for. But in terms of the Drivers' Championship, it's pretty much yeah, nothing they can really do. So, if we were to say hypothetically, Verstappen has a disaster in Las Vegas, which to be quite honest, I don't think either of us or many people expect that to happen. I think we think Verstappen will claim that title in Las Vegas. But let's say for hypothetical reasons, Verstappen does have a disaster. Norris is able to close enough of a gap to the point where he's still in the title fight. How likely would you say he is that he could challenge for it going into Qatar, depending on the result in Vegas if Verstappen has a stinker?
I mean, you look at the sort of swing that he'd need. First of all, he'd need to win in Vegas.
Yeah.
And then we'd be looking at something like a 35 or 34 point gap based on whether he takes a fastest lap or not. So that's checkbox number one. And checkbox number two is that he needs a lot of confidence to win. So he's going to have to find some confidence from somewhere. Um, and once he's done that, then he can move on to the third option, which is in Qatar, he's going to need to outscore Verstappen by at least another 10 points on top of that to then take it to the final race. Then he needs another Verstappen retirement and for him to win again. I mean, that's just the scale of the task that's in front of him. He's simply left too much work at this point in the season. Um, and I think a lot also depends on who can switch their car on quicker. Because if McLaren, as they have developed their car somewhat well recently, Red Bull have quietly gone about their business and done it slightly better, I believe. And to the point now where, as you saw in Brazil, Verstappen was able to have very impressive race pace. I mean, half a second quicker than anybody else, I believe. And that wasn't the case in the last few months at all. Red Bull are now in a position to do that again. So if they can nail the setup in Qatar, it's game over, regardless of whether he has a disaster in Vegas. But that being said, what we're looking at here is Vegas is a street circuit.
Yeah.
And as you've seen in Monaco before, and in Canada, even with the Wall of Champions, um, mistakes can happen. So say he has a mistake there, you then head to Qatar. Qatar is very hot. Abu Dhabi is very hot. Both are in the Middle East, as we know. And Red Bull's engine hasn't been amazing this year, but it certainly hasn't been anywhere near the fastest, and it hasn't quite been the most reliable. So, what's to say that there's not a double disaster? Who knows? But again, it feels at this point like we're very much clutching at straws, and we are relying on nothing but Max Verstappen retirements to even have a chance of there being a slight fight in Qatar. And then moving on to Abu Dhabi, we need miracles. Pigs will fly. if that Drivers' Championship is still open heading into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Yeah, certainly it does. I mean, we're not really expecting hoping for much, are we? When it comes to a tense title fight towards the end. But yeah, I think we are probably expecting Verstappen to seal the deal at least in Vegas. If not Vegas, then Qatar, Abu Dhabi. If it goes to the final day of the season, that'll be an astronomical turnaround from Norris and an absolute disaster from Verstappen. But so that's that in terms of the Drivers' Championship. I think going back to the Constructors' Championship a little bit, I want to touch upon towards probably the less important half of the Constructors' Championship, but it does still mean a lot for the teams towards the bottom for the millions of pounds that are on offer. We obviously saw Alpine catapult themselves out of nowhere from ninth into sixth with a double podium in Sao Paulo, which has now potentially put them in a chance to earn, as I said, their millions more over the likes of Haas and VCarb. I think at the moment, well, Mercedes are almost guaranteed to finish fourth. I think they're going to finish fourth. Aston Martin, while they have been pretty poor this season, also look pretty good to finish fifth, depending on the performance of the other teams. So, and then when you're looking at between the battle for sixth, it's most likely between Alpine, Haas, and VCarb. Williams are probably too far away, and Sauber are just Sauber at the moment. So, out of those three teams there, Alpine, Haas, and VCarb, we've got a pretty interesting battle in the midfield between three teams that you would say are capable of scoring points at these next three races.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you to take your pick out of all of them, it's probably not going to be Alpine, in my opinion. They had that one miracle race, but they scored 16 points, was it, in nearly 20 races before that? They're going to need another miracle like that, even to secure, let's say, a sixth and a seventh place finish. And that might then not be enough. Haas are definitely best positioned. VCarb have shown that they can scrape a few points together. So if Haas have a disaster weekend in Vegas and VCarb are able to pick up eighth, ninth, maybe even a seventh and an eighth, there's going to be real pressure on them in the final two weekends, and that fight will be fascinating for six. So at the moment, I'm going to say I'm going with Haas. If there's a disaster, it's VCarb, and if yet more pigs fly, it's going to be Alpine. Even though they are in sixth position at the moment, I still think they are probably going to finish eighth.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, to be honest. I think, well, the Alpine result, as you say, came completely out of nowhere. I mean, strategy got lucky with the red flag, let's be honest. But to be fair, I mean, Alpine did look on the pace, particularly Esteban Ocon. He looked on the pace in Sao Paulo, but whether you see that as a fluke, I mean, the stats and the points they scored in the first 20 Grand Prix before that suggest that it was. But you can't take anything away from them. It was a great result. Haas, for me, completely agree. I think they've got the best package of the three. I think, and they've got the drivers. I think they're capable of pushing on to score points regularly, as Nico Hulkenberg has proven in abundance this season of how consistent he's been. VCarb, I think in Sao Paulo they showed promise, but I thought they were quite desperately unlucky, to be honest, to not finish a bit higher throughout the rest of the races. But they still again proved that they can score points, but perhaps not enough to maybe push further on. So I do agree with that. I think Haas have got probably it has to got the better package. I think they stand a better chance of finishing sixth. I'd edge VCarb over Alpine, but I can see it actually being quite close between those two because Alpine, I think, but both Alpine and VCarb have proven that they can potentially get one or even both cars into Q3, and from there can potentially hold their own and get points. But it's going to be interesting in all aspects of the championship going into it. So that's probably the preview there for those races. If we're looking a bit further on, perhaps into 2025, we've obviously had some pretty big news recently. If we're talking very briefly on this for 2025, of course, Gabriel Bortoleto has been confirmed finally as the second Sauber driver for next year. If we're talking very briefly on that, what do you think about that move for the future, essentially? Because it does seem like it's more. They're thinking more about Audi than they are about next season with Sauber with the signing of Bortoleto, in my view.
Yeah, you look at the recent history of the McLaren development program, and they've got quite a good history of signing good drivers. They nabbed Oscar Piastri, but Lando Norris came through that program and was brilliant. Mika Hakkinen, I think, came through that program and was brilliant. They're pretty good at finding good drivers. So Gabriel Bortoleto being let go of is a great coup for Audi in the future. They've got Hulkenberg with experience, who's going to give him a bit of help, no doubt, as he beds in his rookie season. And what better time to do it than coming off the back of a season where you haven't scored any points? Expectations are very low, and it's the final year before new technical regulations. He literally just has a clean slate and a free pass to experiment, to get used to life in Formula One, and he has a great mentor in doing it. You look back a few seasons ago at Haas, who had two rookies, a slow car, and new technical regulations coming, but they didn't have anyone to kind of bed those drivers in Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. And they also weren't trending in the right direction. They were really far off the back of the grid, whereas Sauber at least a bit closer in that regard. So I think that move is interesting. I don't know whether they've sold themselves a bit short, whether Red Bull may have been interested in Bortoleto, especially if he wins the Formula 2 championship. But they had Hadjar right behind from their driver program. And that championship fight in Formula 2 is going to be really interesting over the final two races in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. Because there's a good chance that Isack Hadjar can yet come out on top. And if he does come out on top, has a chance at a Formula One drive. And if he has a chance at a Formula One drive, that probably means that Sergio Perez is not on the grid in 2025. Just what do you think of Perez's chances at the moment? I saw something in the media the other day that suggested that because of his marketing commitments and contract, will be obliged, but I don't know. I don't know whether I believe that. His performances just have been so far off the mark. Surely there's no way that Red Bull can keep a hold of him.
Well, you would think so. I mean, you'd think what we all wonder why he was given an extension beyond this year, like going into it. I mean, they've obviously done it to keep him. Well, they've obviously done it to try and hope that it calms him down a little bit and gives him that bit of security. But if anything, he's got worse since that contract was put on the table. And unfortunately, we've got to the point. I mean, I have been a fan of Checo over the years. He's been in F1, when he was in his Sauber days. Obviously, the McLaren move didn't work out, but he kind of built himself back up at Force India and at Racing Point. Arguably deserved his seat at Red Bull initially in 2021, in my opinion. I still hold that view, but unfortunately, it just hasn't really worked out. I mean, yeah, he picked up the spoils from Max Verstappen last year, but he only narrowly did that, and he finished with more than double the points behind his teammate, which is in itself is unacceptable. Then again, it shows the dominance of Verstappen. For me, it's just so difficult because the whole Red Bull situation is so complex. Because you think of it for what it is. RB have got the last seat available on the grid, and you think, okay, Lawson will get that. But then this whole Perez thing, if Perez isn't on the grid for next year, there's a seat available at both teams because you then would think, right, VCarb and sorry, yeah, one of the VCarb drivers, Sonoda or Lawson, are going to get promoted, and then that leaves a spot available at VCarb. And then, as you said there, Isack Hadjar, who, if he wins the F2 championship, I think he should be a shoe-in to get the seat. By the sounds of it, he's going to be their reserve driver anyway next year. So he will be in F1 in some capacity, and obviously Bortoleto is already in F1. But then you've got Franco Colapinto emerging out of nowhere. Red Bull apparently interested in him. Horner confirming his interest in Sao Paulo. They've offered a couple million to Williams already to try and attract him. So it's a very difficult situation in terms of who's going to end up where. If it were my choice, I think it is it's very difficult for Perez to stay in F1 now. I think it is very hard to justify that, especially from how poor he's been over the course of the season, not just in comparison to Verstappen, but in comparison to even some of the drivers towards the back end of the field. Like Liam Lawson, the last couple of races has proven to be better than him, which is really not a good look for him. And obviously Lawson doing it in a slower car. So he offers a lot of marketability. He's got decent backing behind him, which Red Bull will like, and obviously it's a bit of continuity from the amount of key figures that they've lost. Adrian Newey, Will Courtney, Jonathan Wheatley, all these key figures are gone. They're going to want some sort of continuity, but at the same time, you've got to try and build for the future. I mean, ultimately, they've lost the Constructors' Championship, in my opinion, because of Perez's performances alone. That's what's going to cost them, and I don't think they will win the Constructors. I think it will be between McLaren and Ferrari. So then yeah, if I'm giving my simple answer, Perez, I think shouldn't be in that Red Bull next year. Who would I then put in his place? I think realistically, it's between Lawson and Sonoda. I'd probably edge towards Sonoda. I don't think Lawson is ready yet. I think off the basis that he hasn't really performed across a full season yet, and he kind of needs that. He needs that full season to kind of build himself up. And I think Yuki, he's been at the setup 4 years now. He won't. Will he be as good as Sonoda, Perez is right now? I think that's up for debate. Whether he'll compete for podiums regularly or win races is another question, but I just think he surely can't do worse than Perez. And then as for VCarb, I'd have Lawson, and then it seems to be a shootout between Hadjar, who's been in the Red Bull system for quite a while, and Colapinto, who's had no affiliation with Red Bull whatsoever, but has proven his worth in F1 from his time at Williams. And Red Bull, as we know, are renowned for not giving their juniors a chance and signing drivers that have had no affiliation to them previously. Prime example being Nick de Vries, which would be almost deja vu because he was actually signed because of his performance with Williams at the 2022 Italian Grand Prix. So it's a very difficult situation. I think from the basis that Hadjar has been at Red Bull for a while, I'd probably it's tough because yeah, I think based off that, I think Hadjar perhaps deserves the seat more in a way, but then obviously Colapinto's proven himself in F1 already, you probably say maybe he should be getting the seat as well. It's such a complex situation that I can't tell you. But if I was to give you a definitive answer, I'd probably go Verstappen and Tsunoda at Red Bull, and then Lawson, and then I probably would have to say Colapinto over Hadjar. Although it would be very, very disappointing for Hadjar to miss out on that RB seat. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, look, it's a tough situation, and if I were Red Bull, just because they will have a far, far better picture of what Hadjar is capable of, I would pick him if they've got enough evidence that suggests that he is Formula One material.
Yeah.
Um, what's the point in having him in the junior academy if he's not good enough for Formula One day? If he's won Formula Two, he's probably good enough for Formula One. And Franco Colapinto, much like we've seen with Nick De Vries before, could just be suited to that Williams car. You never know. Well, that's probably not the case. I think it would be wiser for Red Bull to go with Hadjar. So I'd be much more inclined for a Verstappen and Lawson and a Sonoda and a Hadjar lineup, which is harsh on Sonoda. I would rather see him in Red Bull, I think, because he's earned that opportunity. But they just don't seem to like him that much. And obviously, they also
Yeah.
have way more data on him in a Formula One car and will know whether he's capable of driving a Red Bull car. Formula One is a data driven business, and we all know that they make decisions based off that normally. So, yeah, that, at the end of the day, it's going to unfold. It's going to be chaos, and as will the final three races of the Formula One season.
It certainly will, and it also shapes up 2025 to be a very exciting final season of the current technical regulations as well, which I'm very much looking forward to. But of course, we do have this season to conclude, and it is going to be a very interesting final three races, even if we do expect Verstappen to walk away with that title. The three races, regardless, will present a very good three races. I am sure of that. So that's going to conclude this episode of Full Oversteer. I hope you guys did enjoy this. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this around to get the views up a little bit. But yeah, this has been Tyler Robinson. I'm here with Shay Rogers as ever, and we'll see you all next week for the next episode of the Full Oversteer podcast.